All right, I think we're ready to get started. So first of all, thank you everyone who joined us today. Super excited about our session on the state of home care recruiting and training in 2022. Really appreciate all of you who've joined us. What we want to do is a little bit different. In our last webinar, for those of you who are part of our last webinar, we had other panelists. I asked them questions. For this one, we really want you to be the panelists. So please take full advantage of the chat function, the Q&A function, raising your hand. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to get your opinions around the information that we're going to share today. So first of all, just about me, my name is Avi Singer. I'm the CEO and founder of showd.me. Showd.me has been working in the home care industry, focused on training, both in-service and regular training, as well as onboarding and orientation since 2016. So a lot of what we're going to share today is based on data that we've collected, but certainly you'll hear from me as well, some of the experiences that we've had over the last few years. We polled a number of people across the entire country. So this is very much based in the US, but we polled people across the entire country back in March. And we were very, very fortunate to get almost 400 responses from different agencies across the country. And aside from just the great mix of people that we were able to reach out to and get responses from, we also got a nice mix from within agencies. So if you're wondering, who responded to this survey, whose perspective is this? So we had more than 50% are on the HR and compliance side. About 43% came out of management and operations in the home care industry. And then we also had some responses from those involved with technology, IT, software, and things like that. So really nice mix of people who respond to the survey. And therefore, I think the results that you're going to see are going to be reflective of not just a unique perspective within the home care agency world, but also sort of across the management of home care agencies. So that was really nice. And here's what we really want to focus on today. And this is really going to be the areas that we spend our time on. And this is what we asked about. So number one, last year was a tough year. Second year of COVID, we certainly saw a lot of challenges. We also saw agencies becoming innovative, finding new solutions and willing to try new things. So we'll talk about some of the 2021 challenges and outcomes. We also asked a number of questions around 2022, right? Now that what have you learned? What have you changed? What would you like to change? What would you like to do differently? And we're very excited to share some of those results with all of you. And finally, we're going to ask about the technology considerations that you're making for this coming year. I think one thing that many of our clients and many of the agencies that we talk to are very open about is the fact that during COVID, they needed to leverage more technology than they have in the past. And maybe in the past, technology and technology solutions were a choice, but during COVID, very often technology solutions were a must. We had to use them. And therefore, I think people are being much more conscious about what they use and how they use it. Before I get into the survey, I just want to mention one more thing. Often when we look at survey results, we don't always know, like, what should I do with that? How about my agency? I'm in a different state, or maybe I'm much smaller or much larger. I remember years ago, I went to a conference with a colleague of mine, and we got up and we were sitting in a session, and somebody got up and said, Microsoft has a budget of $700 million for training and development. We looked at each other and we didn't have anything near that. And we just said, this doesn't apply to us, right? So, and therefore, like, what's the benefit of hearing the rest of the information in the session? What I want you to think about today is, and the lens that I want you to kind of think about these results are that if this is the average, if this is the response, what can I do better, right? What can I do better to compete in areas like recruiting, in areas like training? Perhaps the response is coming from agencies that are much larger than you are, or in other locations, but nevertheless, you've got to think about, okay, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And if I really want to compete in this market, how am I going to do it better? So that's how I want you to think about some of the things we're going to share today. So this was a big eye opener. I figured we'll start the session just by sharing with you some of the biggest takeaways that we had from the results. And I would say these are the three biggest ones. Of course, we're going to share much more specific information throughout, but these were the biggest areas of takeaway that we had. Number one, agencies are struggling with caregiver training and caregiver engagement. More than 50% of our agencies that we polled said that they had training completion rates of under 70%. That means that a very significant portion of their caregivers are not getting properly trained or not completing the proper training. In fact, only 7% of our agencies had completion rates over 90%. So we'll talk about that today and how you potentially could improve those based on some of the data that we've collected. In 2022, probably as a result of that first key takeaway, 88% of all the agencies that we surveyed are considering a change in how they conduct their in-service. I think everyone's accepted that under 70% is not an acceptable number, and therefore some change has to happen. And we're going to share with you how our agency is going about changing the way that they do in-service. And the last key takeaway here, which I think is probably the most meaningful one and probably resonates the most with this audience, is that 89% of agencies did not meet their hiring goals in 2021. That means almost 9 out of 10 agencies did not meet their hiring goals in 2021. And there's some huge ramifications to that. I mean, simply if you just think about patient care, right? That means that many patients, and everyone on this call probably has this experience, many patients are simply not getting the care that they need because their agencies can't find the staff that they need. And we do have solutions for that. We may not be able to necessarily increase the caregiver pool. That might be a socioeconomic challenge, it might be a political challenge, but there are certainly things agencies can do and agencies that we work with do in order to increase their rate and make sure they're not part of the 9 out of 10. Maybe they're that 1 out of 10 who does meet their hiring goals. Although that's a 2021 number, we're not necessarily seeing that is going to change in 2022. Pressures from all areas. Caregivers in general, there's fewer caregivers in the market, lots of pressure from outside of the home care market, so other industries, big box stores, fast food. So again, I think agencies that we've seen the first few months of this year are similarly challenged to the way they were in 2020, but there are solutions. So let's get started. First thing we want to talk about from our survey results is around training. And it was interesting. Had I been asked prior, I would have said I thought a smaller percentage of agencies were using online training. But in fact, 79% of agencies that we polled have used or are using an online training provider. Some of the hesitancy that I remember seeing back in 2016 when we started is still there. And I just want to address those for a minute. And of course, if you guys have any questions or comments that you want to share about this, we would love to hear from you. Number one, and this is the number one comment I often get when I ask about online training, is agencies say we want to see our caregivers in person. That was the number one reason we had from agencies when they say we haven't tried or we don't do online training. And I think it's an interesting comment. I know from our perspective, we don't believe that when you do online training, that means you should not meet your caregivers. From our perspective, what we believe is you absolutely should meet your caregivers. But in that time when you're meeting with them, spend time with them, right? So you don't need to spend time with them going over HIPAA or OSHA or some of the things that you do on an annual basis because you're required, right? That time should be spent on either good information about your agency, things that are important to your caregivers, or maybe things that are just best done in person, like how to use a Hoyer lift or something like that. And then the second one that I just want to address here is around caregivers not being tech savvy. And while I agree that that's certainly an issue and certainly a challenge, we're seeing that as less of an issue over time. So maybe when we started back in 2016, we saw a lot of caregivers who couldn't, log in or figure out how to log in or register, or whatever it might be. I know at showd.me, we typically see an over 90% engagement rate, which means 9 out of 10 caregivers at the agencies we work with know how to use and are comfortable using technology. So again, to make this interactive, we're actually going to introduce our first poll right now. So if all of you could just take a second, we're going to pop up a poll here. And the question is, has your agency ever used an online training provider? So I know we got from our survey results, but would love to hear from the audience here, have you used an online training provider? Okay, excellent. So we've got definitely a much more technologically advanced group here. So I would say 88% have used an online training provider, and that's great. Moving along, one of the next things we want to dig into was, if you are using an online training provider, or you have, how have you been really conducting in-service? And I think what we're seeing most is that it's a combination of online and on-site, right? Which is, again, we believe in that, right? We believe that that's the way to go, right? There's things that can be covered online and should be covered online, but at the same time, it's important to meet your caregivers on an annual basis. An interesting one that I think came out of COVID, but certainly has challenges to it and will continue to have challenges moving forward, are live remote sessions like through Zoom. Again, we tend to see in the Zoom sessions a lot of technological challenges for caregivers. And then the other thing is, it's still on a schedule, right? I think the other challenge with the Zoom is it's still on a specific schedule versus an online training, e-learning provider where they can do it at their own time. And then we did see a percentage, as you can see on the bottom here, of agencies who are still doing it on site. And again, as we move forward, I think we're going to see fewer agencies who are just doing pure on-site. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the way to sort of look at this is to say, how is my agency doing this? Are we doing a good job of leveraging online training? Are we moving towards e-learning? Are we moving towards asynchronous training? Because that's where it seems like the market is going. So again, poll for everyone here. In 2021, how did your agency conduct your in-service training? All right, let's see the results. Okay, similar to what we got on the survey, right? So hybrid of online and on-site. Again, I think that's the way to go. Using an online training provider. And again, there's still agencies either doing on-site or live remote sessions. But certainly, again, either the online training provider, again, sometimes there's you're in rural locations. It's hard for people to come into the office. I often tell the story of when I first started selling online training. I remember going to an agency, and outside the front of the agency was a full-size bus. I think one of those 50-seat buses. And I said, what's the bus for? And they said, oh, that's our bus. We own it. And I said, what do you do? And he said, well, in the morning we go out there and we collect caregivers from all different neighborhoods and we bring them to the agency and we do in-service. And then at night the bus goes out and brings people back home. And they literally had this bus. It was a very large agency going out every single day. And I mean, fortunately we were able to discuss online training and really change the way that they did things. Some key takeaways over here. So, when you're thinking about making a change, moving from in-person to online, or, from Zoom sessions to online, really what you want to be thinking about is your completion rate. And what we found is what I mentioned at the beginning, right? Such a small percentage of agencies have over 90% completion rate. And we think it could be consistent, across way more agencies. We think a lot more agencies can get to that 90%, can achieve it. It really has a lot to do with that a couple things, I should say, actually. It has to do with who you're working with, right? Frankly, I mean, that's an important thing to think about, right? Work with a provider or a vendor that can get you to that completion rate, the 90% plus. A lot of it has to do with also, like I said, that mix, right? How are you mixing the in-person? How challenging is the in-person, right? To schedule, to get everyone in the door, all those things. So as you're thinking about, hey, what was our completion rate this year? Was it 50%, 60%, 70%? And thinking about how you want to conduct it, in 2022, you've got to think about, what are the levers we can sort of use here, right? What should we be moving online? What should we keep in person so that we're going to achieve that 90% plus completion rate as well? Excellent. This is great. And again, just to focus on some of the challenges in what prevents, many agencies. Again, we polled almost 400 agencies. You got to look at some of these challenges and recognize that, again, when you're doing the in-person, if you're doing Zoom still or things like that, again, number one challenge, schedule, right? I think what this says is most of your in-service has to be asynchronous. It has to be done in a way where caregivers can participate in the training on their own time. Because for many caregivers today, if they're not dealing with a patient, if they're not at a patient's home, if they're not commuting, right, which takes a lot of the time, they've got family, they've got other things going on. Very hard for them to find time for training. Bringing them into the office is disruptive. Them coming into an office is disruptive. Coming into the agency, if they come in on a day when they could have been working, often you can't backfill them. So now the patient doesn't have somebody for the day. So again, that scheduling is certainly the biggest challenge. And then the next two I think are really interesting as well in terms of tech savviness or internet connection. I mentioned before, when I started showd.me, that was one of the biggest complaints that I had, right, from agencies, or one of the biggest concerns, I should say, that agencies had was, one, they're not tech savvy, right? Agencies had experience with EVV and other types of, time and attendance and payroll systems, and just said they can't figure it out. And the second was not everyone has access to the internet. So I'm gonna say something here, and again, the goal of this session is not to plug showd.me. I really just want to share the data, but it is a challenge, and one that we're well aware of. And actually, if you want more information around free internet, happy to share that with you after the call. But there are programs out there that we work with where free internet, free tablets, free technology is available to most caregivers, and in fact, most patients. So definitely reach out to us, because we do see it as a challenge, the tech savviness and accessing the internet, and we have partnered and made that available. Some of the other things that we've noticed as well, again, native language training is super important, right? And not using generic content, right? So we've seen also, besides for, again, on this survey that we did, but we've seen in person as well, like in our own experience, that part of the engagement that a caregiver is going to have with e-learning and their appreciation for e-learning and their willingness to do e-learning again comes from the content being interesting. So your completion rates definitely go up when the content's actually interesting and relevant to them. You're not leveraging something from skilled nursing, or not leveraging like nurse information. You're really using content that was designed for home care aides, which is important. And then the second is language is important, right? And I think all of us know or have the experience that a very large percentage of our caregivers don't speak English. I know that we regularly deal with English, Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, Creole, and a host of other languages. And we find that if you do take the time to both provide content, to provide technology, to provide support in multiple languages, you certainly increase the likelihood of success. Oh, and there's a question about how to contact me after the webinar. I definitely will share that. I appreciate that. I apologize if I'm going to tell you to contact me about internet or other things. I should leave our information, which I will certainly do at the end. But again, I think these are important key takeaways, right? And things are shifting, right? Caregivers are becoming more tech savvy. Most of them do have smartphones, but even if they don't, it's accessible to them. And then the second thing is, there's an expectation, right? We're trying to retain them, we're trying to hire them, we're trying to recruit them. Super important that we're doing things in their native language if their native language is not English. And I think this is really reflected in the second question that we asked, which were what are the key, some of our key takeaways. And agencies understanding that it's not just about moving to online, but being smart about it, right? And the message that we got is they want to make it easier, right? They want it to be more engaging. They want to focus on those completion rates, right? So it's not about, hey, who's the cheapest provider out there, or who's the least expensive provider out there, who's got a big library, right? It's really asking really good questions, right? Do caregivers find it easy to use your platform, right? What do your engagement rates look like? What does your user satisfaction rates look like? What kind of languages can you support, right? Does your training actually improve quality of care? I know we talk a lot about in-service being sort of that checkbox, required training, right? But are you seeing that this content is actually improving quality of care? And I think those are important questions to ask. And I think those are important things that, the people we surveyed, the agencies we surveyed, are asking, from their vendors. All right, now that we've talked about training, I want to move on to another area that I'm sure all of you are really interested in and probably very focused on, which is around hiring, right? And let's face it, I mentioned it already. Hiring is easily the biggest challenge and the #1 priority that we hear about from agencies, right? I think one of the most unique things about our industry, home care, and I talked to a lot of people about this, is the fact that in the home care industry, as opposed to in other industries, you typically have a finite number of jobs in any other industry, right? So if you work in a nursing home, for example, right, and it's got 50 beds, maybe you've got 75 positions. That's it. That's my focus. What's fascinating about home care is, there's two sides to this marketplace. And as you increase the number of patients that you have, and maybe your marketing team and your intake team is just doing a phenomenal job, well, at the same time, you need to increase the number of caregivers you have available. And that's what creates these unique challenges. It's this sort of infinite potential for growth. And therefore, we like I said at the beginning, we heard from 9 out of 10 of our agencies that they did not meet their hiring goals, right? And that's a huge challenge, right? I don't think anyone, I would say something keeps people up at night, it's probably this one, right? Because I don't think anyone wants to sit there and go, wow, we have patients who need service that we can't service. We have business that we could be achieving that we're unable to because we're not able to get to the people that we want to because we can't find those people. And we're going to dig into this a little bit now and sort of understand what are things that agencies are currently doing that are helpful around increasing your hires, and what are some things you can do. So #1, and I mentioned this at the outset, is that there's very little that any of us here can do around increasing the pool, right? So we cannot necessarily increase the pool of candidates, right? Again, that boils down to socioeconomic things and political things and geographic locations. So sometimes the pool of candidates is just it's finite, right? But one thing you can do, and we see a huge difference between agencies that do this efficiently and other agencies, is you can make your onboarding much more efficient. Right? So we asked agencies, how do you currently conduct onboarding and orientation, right? And you can see here, 24% said it was done on site. We had 36% who said it's done online. And then we have those who do a hybrid of online and on site. And again, I think that's important, right? I don't think you want to hire anyone without ever meeting them. And again, Zoom could be a way to meet them. So you don't necessarily have to meet them in person, but you certainly want to make sure that there's a combination of both. Right? There's a significant amount of training and onboarding and orientation can be done online. And there's some things that have to be done in office. And in fact, things like an I-9 and things like that anyway have to be done in office. But here's some of the things you can think about and sort of what you can do a little bit better, right? 89% of applicants had to come to the office 5 or more times to complete their orientation onboarding. Now that's a big area for improvement. Right. So again, we surveyed hundreds of agencies and they said 89, it's 9 out of 10 applicants will have to come back 5 times to complete orientation and onboarding. That's because there's paperwork that has to get done. That's because there's documentation they need to bring in. That's because sometimes the person who conducts the onboarding orientation has to be available. Sometimes there's different days that's being covered. That's a lot though. When someone's applying to your agency and they're also applying to other agencies, and they're potentially applying to other industries, having them come back to your office 5 times is too much. You're leaving too much opportunity for them to drop out of the process, for someone else to move a bit faster or hire them faster, or maybe another industry to call, right? Maybe they get a call from Target or Walmart for a little bit more money, and now they're gonna go work there. So that's a #1 thing, I think, when I talked about at the beginning, what's a takeaway from a survey like this? It's understanding that the average right now seems to be 5 times and more, and that certainly can be improved on. So let me ask you guys, did your caregivers have to come back 3 or more times to complete orientation and onboarding? Think about the past year. How often did they have to come back in order to complete onboarding orientation? All right, let's see. Okay, so people are getting more efficient. I think there's a recognition here, and that's great. So the response here is that they didn't have to come back 3 or more times. And that's really something to think about. I know that when I talk to our clients and they're looking to improve their hiring rates, I ask them about that, right? What are your touch points? What are the drop-off points? What's the most common drop-off point that you're seeing, right? And are there ways of amending that and fixing that? The other thing that we saw, aside from the amount of times that they have to come back, is how long it takes, right? And we said, how long does it typically take a new hire applicant to fully complete orientation onboarding? And it takes 70%, almost 70% more than a week. And I would say, based on this, if you can improve that, if you can get this done in less than a week, their entire onboarding and onboarding orientation, you're going to win, right? So I always assume that when someone applies to an agency, they've applied to multiple agencies, right? And let's assume that they're a perfectly great candidate. They've got their certificate up to date, they've got their medical up to date, everything's great. They're ready to start tomorrow. So now it's just a matter of time, right? And they've also applied to multiple agencies. So whichever agency can get them through the process faster is going to get that employee, is going to get that candidate in most scenarios. So if you can get it done in less than a week, you're going to be ahead of the game here. All right. And then what we noticed also is, like I mentioned before, is that drop-off point, right? And we asked what percentage of caregivers that start your orientation actually complete it. And it's not that high, right? Only 7% of our agencies said that 80%, I know it's a little bit challenging to understand the statistic here, but I'll explain it to you. 7% of our agencies said that 80% of the people who start finish, right? But a vast majority of respondents said that most of their candidates, or a large percent of their candidates, don't make it through the process. And as I mentioned before, we know why that is, right? It's because they went to work someplace. They didn't drop out of the workforce, right? So that's not what it is. They got a job someplace else. They went to work for somebody else. They went to work for a competitor. They went to work for another industry. And therefore, like I said before, I can't increase the number of people who apply to your agency, right? That's a function of marketing. It's a function of sales. It's a function actually of spend. You know, how much are you willing to spend on job boards and things like that. The only thing that we can improve is when you get that shot, you get that opportunity, are you taking full advantage of it? Are you getting a large percentage of your applicants through the process quickly and efficiently? And the more efficient you make it, the faster you make it, well, the higher the percentage of candidates you're going to be able to hire. I see we've got a couple of questions here. Let's take a look here. Yeah, I see there's a comment here about the physicals. So let me comment on that for a second here. And again, this is something that we've been working with our clients on the last couple of years, and I think it's an important way to think about things. Let's assume that 10 people apply to your agency today, okay? The first thing that you want to do is you want to qualify them, right? So in our mind, again, this is based on literally thousands and thousands of applicants that we've helped our clients onboard and orient, okay? So the first thing that you want to do is you got 10 applicants. You want to qualify them. What does that mean? What does it mean to qualify a candidate? Do you have a certificate and are your medical records up to date, right? Do you have an HHA or PCA certificate, whatever certificate you need, and are your medicals up to date? If they are, if you've got those two things, that's a qualified candidate. That's in your pool. If not, you can help them try to get it. You may have ways of, you can maybe you work with a school and you can send them to school, or maybe you work with occupational practices and urgent cares, whoever it might be, to help them get their physical. You can do that, but they're not really in your pool yet. They can come back. Okay, so you want to focus on those qualified candidates. Let's say it's 50-50. 10 people applied, and now 5 of them say, yes, I've got an HHA certificate, I've got a physical update. That's what you want to focus on. If your recruiting team is focusing on the entire 10, you're wasting a lot of time. They're not qualified. So again, have a qualification process. And then if you can qualify them, you're going to increase your conversion rate on those applicants to hires, because you're only going to focus on getting that small percentage through your onboarding orientation. But if you're chasing after all 10, that's going to be a huge challenge. So someone did make a comment that the biggest challenge is around the medicals, and I agree. So you want to help them with that, but don't put them in the same bucket together with everyone else, because if you start bringing them for orientation, onboarding now, and you start going through everything like that, but they still haven't done their medicals, and then you did all this work and they still don't have their medical done, you waste a lot of time. And again, I think what agencies are looking for, and this is what we heard from our over 350 respondents, is that agencies are looking for a simpler way, a more convenient way to complete onboarding orientation, right? So I'm going to give you my recommendation now. I'm going to tell you what I see working. I gave you one before, but I'm going to give you another one right now. Number one, use that qualified candidate concept, right? If they're not qualified, you can help them get qualified, but only focus on the qualified candidates. Now, the second thing is super important, and that is, once you've qualified them, get as much as you can done online as possible. Okay, so get as much of the onboarding orientation done remotely as possible. And it's not just for efficiency. There's another reason why getting orientation and onboarding done, or a big part of it done remotely, is super important. And that is because it tells you if the candidate is serious, right? If you send a candidate a link saying, hey, here are your forms that you need to complete. Here's some training you need to complete. Here's the application documents. Here's the orientation documents. Here are the signatures that we need. If they do it, then they're saying, I want to come work for you. And if they don't, well, then that's probably another message, right? Maybe they found another job. But I think what a lot of us are doing is we're trying to get them to come into the office, and we're scheduling, and we're creating orientation sessions, and they just don't show up. So again, it's a lot of coordination time wasted in chasing after people if we don't know they're serious or not. So one of the ways to gauge, is this a serious candidate? Should I bring them into the office? Should I schedule them to come in? Is first get them to do some of the steps online, as much as you think it's feasible, right? So get them to do some of the application, get them to do some documents, get them some training, some quizzes, surveys, whatever it is. And then once they've done that, well, now I know you're serious. You wouldn't have spent an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 or 4 hours doing all this paperwork, getting all this done, if you weren't serious. Well, now I want you to come into the office. Okay, so number one, I do think there are simpler ways of getting onboarding orientation done. I think there are also smarter ways of getting it done. Hopefully that makes sense. Finally, the last area that we asked our respondents about was around technology. We've certainly seen a big move around technology. I think more and more, I think agencies are starting to understand just how much technology and how many pieces of technology are important to run an agency. So besides your agency management software, perhaps using something else for EDD, payroll, benefits, training, paperwork, right? Applicant tracking systems, learning management systems. An agency now may have 7, 8, maybe even 10 different systems that they're using. Maybe you have a system you're using for text messaging. You've got a lot of different technologies that you're using. So we had a few questions around this that I want to cover. Number one, we were really interested in trying to figure out, now that agencies are more open-minded than even I remember them being back in 2016, 2017, what prevents an agency from engaging with new technology, trying new technology? And the number one response we've gotten, that was 2 out of 3 respondents said that their concerns around ease of use, right? Too many pieces of software out there are not easy to use. Either they're not designed for home care and they're just sort of being, reconfigured, or just they're not well designed. And I think that's a huge concern. I think that's a big question that as you're exploring or thinking about new technologies, you're certainly asking yourself, right? How easy is this to use, not just for the caregivers. Of course, we want it to be easy for them. They're the ones who have some challenges, but even for the office staff. Are people going to use this on a regular basis? The second is around, ease of implementation, right? How long does it take to get up and running? And I know that, again, as a software provider, we know that this is a big concern. When someone makes that decision, oh yeah, I want to use your technology, I'd like to work with you. How much work is it going to be? We've all got full-time jobs, right? We're running an agency, right? We're trying to get things done here, right? We're trying to service patients. We don't have time to spend on hours and hours of calls with consultants trying to figure out how to implement it. And finally, I get this all the time. This is probably for me the number one question I get, but again, one of the top three concerns that we got was, is this really going to make my life easier, right? Is this really going to reduce our dependency on staff? Are we able to reduce the number of staff that we need, right? Because very often, I think we've all had experience where, we're sold that shiny new thing and we're told, hey, this is gonna make your workload, cut your workload in half and make life easier. And then you look around 6 months later and it hasn't. Everyone's still doing just as much work. Maybe you've had to hire even more people. So we get that question a lot. Now, what I thought was really interesting was one of the lower on the list of things around considerations was price. So you think, again, in our world where margins are tight and dollars are tight, you would think that price would be a much bigger concern. I think agencies have recognized we've got to pay for good technology. We're prepared to pay for good technology. So price is not our biggest concern. Our concern is, if we pay that price, are we going to get everything that we've been promised? And I think that's a really, really important thing to think about and to consider when you're considering new technologies. I had a request here for a quick review on our application process. I'll do it. Again, I don't like to use these, just disclaimer. I'll do it at the end. Anyone who wants to leave can leave. I don't like to use these sessions for the most part as an opportunity to plug showd.me. I'm always happy to do demos and things like that. On these, we typically would like to just focus on things that we think are helpful to the industry. So, I'm not, I don't want to promote showd.me. However, there is a request. So at the end, after we've answered all the questions, if we've still got a few minutes, perhaps I'll do a demo. If not, I can certainly follow up with anyone who wants and show you, what our process looks like. But thank you for that question. Last poll, I think, for the day is one last one here. Have you or do you intend to implement new technology for recruiting and training in 2022? So we're just interested in your thoughts on this. Are you planning on purchasing, implementing, putting in new training for 2022, and then we'll wrap things up. Let's get that last poll up. There we go. All right, let's see our results. Okay, 50-50. That's interesting. Oh, 56-44, right? Again, could be that people have found all the technology that they're looking for. Certainly seems that a lot are intending to implement new technologies for recruiting and training. And here's my thought on that. And again, I've been in the technology in over 15 years. Always be out there. I know it's hard to find the time, but at least once a month. At least once a month, I would say, make the time to see what's out there. I know we all get lots of demo requests and everybody wants to sell us and pitch us, but it's super important to see what's out there, right? Whether it's recruiting software, whether it's training software, whether it's agency management software, something for EVV, whatever it is, right? Things evolve, things change, new companies come up, and it's worth knowing what's out there. It doesn't mean you've got to make changes. That means it doesn't mean you've got to switch every single year, but it does mean that you'll see what's out there, and you can go back to your current provider and say, hey, I'm seeing this in the recruiting space. I'm seeing this in the training space. I'm seeing this in the agency management software space. Is this something you're planning on doing, right? So it's always important from a technology standpoint, know what's out there, know what's being built, know what's being offered. And no, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to make changes every single year. Hopefully you're finding vendors and providers that are consistent, but certainly something to think about. So, again, final conclusion over here. Just, I guess, one little plug for showd.me. These are all things, what we discussed there are things that, again, we've seen in the industry over the last 5-6 years, and certainly things that we focused on addressing. Whether it's technology challenges, implementation challenges, caregiver usage, languages, all those things. It's how we've gotten to the point where we currently have over 90% completion rate online for our in-service. And then we have about a 65% conversion rate on qualified applicants. So that means when an applicant is qualified, they do have a certificate or they're up-to-date physicals, we can actually convert about 65% of them through complete remote onboarding orientation. So again, everything we mentioned today are things that we think about a lot, that we consider a lot, and take very seriously. So I'm going to open up the floor now for questions. If anyone's got any questions, anything we didn't cover, anything you'd like us to cover, feel free to put it into the chat right now, the Q&A. We'll try to cover it. If we are left with a couple of minutes at the end, I'll just do a quick demo of what remote onboarding and orientation could look like. Give you some examples of what it might look like for those of you that want to stick around. All right, any questions? No, we go another 30 seconds or so if anyone has any questions. If not, like I said, I'll just kind of show you some examples of how it could look for those of you that want to stick around. All right, seems like most people don't want to ask questions. They just want a demo. So we will do that. Okay. Here we go. Oh, it's like I've got to sign out first here. Sorry about that. I wasn't planning on doing a demo, so I was still logged in. Okay. So as I mentioned, essentially what happens, still logged in. I'll try this one more time. Here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, typically what happens is someone's applying to an agency through Indeed, some job board, My CNA Jobs, maybe you have an applicant tracking system, maybe they're coming into your office, right? We will try to integrate with that and be able to pull that information about who's applied to your agency. So we can sometimes automate that process of receiving that information, and sometimes it's a manual process, right? So some of our agencies will have a little trigger in their applicant tracking system saying, hey, this is a qualified candidate. showd.me, now it's on you. And some of them will have, a manual process where they say, okay, we've qualified the candidate. Now let's move them over to showd.me. In that scenario, what happens now is that showd.me takes over. So once you've said, okay, this is a qualified candidate, I want to hire them, we then reach out to them. So we actually create a username and password for that candidate. We connect them, or we actually add them to the correct onboarding orientation for that agency. And then we send them a text message. And the text message says, hey, you've applied to Acme Agency, congratulations. Here's your username, here's your password, here's your onboarding orientation. It then takes them to a site that looks like this, again, optimized for mobile, so you don't have to worry about that. And then some of the things that we mentioned in the survey you're going to see here. So for example, we will have the platform translated into their native language. So if you have somebody who only speaks Mandarin applying to your agency, and they come to a site that only has English, that's already going to be a drop-off point. So number one, you want to make sure that you're able to address them and get them through the process in their native language. Number two is they need help, right? They may need help with logging in. They may need help with their username and password. You have to have some kind of support for that. We use chat, both through online chat, and you can see our response time is under 5 minutes, as well as through SMS. It has to be under 5 minutes. I mentioned so many times during this presentation that time is of the essence. So if they come to this page and they're trying to log in because they want to complete their orientation onboarding and they can't, that's going to be a problem. Once they log in, they're taken immediately to the correct, again, you're going to see a couple things in here. I wasn't planning on doing this, so Let me just find the right orientation here. Give me a second. Here we go. So they're going to be taken to the correct orientation, right? And in this orientation, you're able to accomplish multiple things. Again, this can also be multilingual. Number one is application. So we split into three areas. We say the first thing is they've got to complete their application. So far, what they've shared with you on Indeed or your applicant tracking system is probably their name, maybe some basic information. And again, you've qualified them. So now they're coming here and you need additional information, right? So they have the opportunity. You can see here some of the areas are pre-filled. They'll have the opportunity to complete additional information and submit it. You can do things like availability. So if you want to know what languages they speak, where they can work, what shifts they're able to do they want to work a live-in shift, they can do that. And then any other types of forms that are part of your application process. Now, even though these forms seem complicated and seem challenging, again, I think I mentioned before, 65% of the people who are doing this get through it no problem. They complete the whole thing. So they're able to sign. Having it pre-filled out is certainly very helpful, and everything here is optimized for online, remote onboard orientation. Is optimized for mobile, I should say. Now, because of the speed to hire and the fact that maybe another agency is calling them and trying to get them to come into their office, when they complete their application forms, we don't stop there. So immediately, as soon as they finish the application forms, we now say, okay, so start your training. If you're motivated, keep them motivated, keep them moving. So you've done all your application forms, that's great. We're reviewing them, but while we're reviewing them, you keep going, right? So work their way through whatever is part of your orientation training. It could be videos, it could be PowerPoint presentations, it could be anything, right? So just keep them moving, keep them moving. And then when they've done all the videos, so now you've got somebody who's completed all your application forms, who's completed all your videos, well then let them fill out the final forms, right? So if your final forms here might be, a W-4, it might be some policies you need them to complete and sign, so they can complete and sign it. If you're part of a union, maybe they do union enrollment, whatever it is. We've got agencies that have 30 plus documents in here that are being filled out. They've got videos, they've got quizzes, but the goal is keep them moving, keep them moving, keep them moving. And then the last step is they would sign it, and as soon as they sign it, they're done. Right? So in our scenario, what we're seeing is those motivated candidates, 65% of the applicants on average, sometimes agencies are over 70, some are a little bit under 60, but around 65% are motivated. Once you get that started, they're going to see it through. And the beauty of that is now when you call them and say, okay, you're done, come into the office, let's do your I-9, let's do your fingerprint, let's meet you in person, they're going to actually show up. Because they didn't spend 3 hours, 4 hours going through this whole process here, filling everything out on their phone, a challenging process in any way, shape, or form, to now not show up at your office. So when you call them and say, hey, congratulations, in under 2 days, in under 3 days, you complete our entire remote onboarding orientation. If you come in tomorrow, right, and we meet you and you do your I-9, everything like that, we'll be able to put you on a case this week. We'll be able to match you up with the patient this week. They are absolutely going to show up. 90% of the people who complete the application online will actually show up in your office. And that's again, one of the data points we have from our clients. So that's what you're looking for. Again, I'm not trying to plug showd.me here, but I want to dispel a few myths. Number one, the people who are going through this remote onboarding orientation have never used showd.me before, right? These are not clients of ours. These are people applying to clients of ours. So number one, that notion that they're not tech savvy enough. Again, maybe a percentage. I mean, that's why it's not a higher percentage, but certainly 2/3 plus are tech savvy enough to complete an entire remote onboarding orientation, 35, 40 steps, sometimes completely remotely. And then the second thing is, again, there are things that you need to consider, when you're trying to figure out how to do this efficiently. Language, language support is important. Support is important, right? So there are things you need to figure out. I'm open to any questions. Again, I don't want to, like I said, I can certainly share with you my email address, and I think we'll share my email address and all my information on the chat so everyone can have it there. Happy to have further conversations about this. But if you have any questions, hey, a really good question. Can they upload documents? Yes, right? So we can set that up. It's a little different with that, in uploading a document because, again, someone's got to be on the receiving end to verify it. right? So, when you're completing a document, I can tell you it's been completed and signed. When you're uploading a document like a license or something like that, certainly someone's got to be on the receiving side of that in order to verify. But absolutely, that can happen. Question here about visibility. Can admin access have full visibility? Absolutely, right? So, it's yours. I mean, we're helping. We provide it as a service, right, in terms of following up and providing the support. But certainly, we want our agencies to have access along the way. We want them to be receiving the document as they're being filled out. So absolutely, admins can have access and full visibility to the caregiver's account as they're moving on. It's not ours. This is yours. I have a question here about a rehiring packet. Yeah. I mean, I think, again, I'm only going from our experience of the last 6 years. I think agencies are creative and clever, right? And find different ways to use this. I'm just showing you a way they use, showd.me for like onboarding orientation, but hiring packets, consumer directed, getting them to fill out any types of forms. I mean, we have clients who call us and say, hey, can you get all my employees to sign up for direct deposit? Right? Can you get people to fill out, their benefits information? So certainly something we can, and we always encourage our clients to be creative and think about different ways that they can leverage the platform. Any other questions? What else can I cover? Oh, here's a really good question. Right. So question was about the orientation is on the day of the hire and they're paid for that. The online onboarding would not be paid. Correct. As far as I know, again, it's a really good question. I don't get involved with that side. I don't think it is. I think the in-person orientation. So again, they've done all the forms, they've shown they're motivated, right? They've got all that done. I don't think they get paid for it. I think, but they do show up, in the office for whatever the in-person orientation, they get paid for that. However, little idea here, offer a completion bonus, right? I mean, I'll tell you honestly, we haven't even done it yet. I mean, maybe our clients we don't know about it, but I don't think they're doing it. I think the percentage go even higher than 65% if you said, oh, by the way, when you're done, $50. Right, or whatever you think the time would be. If it's 3 hours or 4 hours, I would do a commensurate, a commensurate type of amount. So I don't think, back to the question, I don't think they get paid for it. Maybe they do, maybe agencies are. I'm not 100% sure. Definitely getting paid for that first day when they come into the office. I know that they're getting paid for. But certainly, again, if you wanted to just encourage people to be able to participate online onboarding orientation or get them to complete it, I think if you offered some kind of completion bonus, it's certainly worthwhile. You have to figure out what that number is. Is it $50? Is it $100? What is it that you would pay? You probably even get a higher percentage. But to the best of my knowledge, I think what we're achieving at that 65% conversion rate is happening without the financial incentive, other than the job. Any other questions, thoughts, ideas? My information has been shared in the chat. So anyone wants to follow up, you have additional questions, you want to just talk about home care, because I love home care and home care technology and just want to talk about it, that'd be fine. If you want to see anything that we do or anything like that, feel free to reach out. Certainly appreciate all of you getting on the call today, participating with the polls and things like that. Look out for a number of additional webinars we're going to do. We've got one focused on retention, which I think is a big one coming up soon. We talked about recruiting and onboarding a lot, but what happens, once they're on board, how do we keep them? So certainly look out for that. So thank you so much for all your time today. Any further questions, again, you can follow up with us afterwards, and have a great rest of your day.